Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I'm not late, okay, I'm just 2 minutes. Okay, so today we are going to continue from where we stopped last week. I'll just quickly run through the things we did last week, and I'm going to talk about what I'll do today, and yeah, then we'll get to writing code. No, so last week we talked about the box model, we talked about paddings, margins, we talked about we talked about paddings, margins, borders, and we tried to style our registration form a bit. Still kind of looks weird, but we'll get there. So today, so I didn't have enough time to finish up what I intended to do last week. Yes, last week I was going to also talk about like layouts, layout techniques, CSS layout techniques. Uh, since I could not do that last week, I'm going to do that today. And yeah, so CSS has some unique features and properties that allow you to structure your web page as you see fit. Gives you the ability to move things from their original positions, basically structure your page in any way you see fit. And we are going to see an example of this, some of these techniques. So I think this would be a good opportunity to design something or to put something in our profile.html page. And yeah, let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be talking about is excuse me, the display property. So CSS allows you to display elements on the page however you want to display them, and you can do that using a display property. So let me open up our form here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two major, maybe three. Yeah, okay, three is fine. So I'm going to be talking about the block, the display values block, hidden, and flex. There are others that you can use, others that are kind of common, inline block. I'm going to talk about how their differences and what they do. But I think it would be best for me to show you how to use these properties. So let's use our form title, for example. So our form title here on the registration page, is registration form, right? And maybe I want to hide this form title for some reason. Maybe I want it to show up when something happens. I don't want it to show up at a particular point in time, or I just want to hide it, but I still want the HTML content to be available on the page, just hidden. CSS allows you to do that, right? And you can do that using the display hidden. So let's think, okay, we have the form title here. That's the ID of our element. I'm going to use our hash to select the element using its ID. And what I'm going to do here is set display to hidden. So what this does is it just basically hides the element from the page. The element will still be here in the HTML content document, but it will just not be visible, right? So if I save this and 1 second. Oh, sorry, display none. Sorry, that was a mistake. I lost it there for a second. So it's display none, not hidden. hidden is hidden is just kind of common in my head because most of the time when I'm writing CSS, I use a class called hidden to hide like elements I don't want to be visible on the page. So I pass display none to that class and use the class on elements that I don't want to show. So display none. setting display none will basically hide the element. The element is still in the HTML document. It's just not visible on the page, so the user will not see it, right? And this comes in super handy when you are doing things like you are trying to basically make your page behave a certain way. So let's say you want um, a menu to show up when the user clicks on something. So you know how I think most of us browse with our mobile phones. You know how you have these three line icons in most websites where, let me quickly go to BBC for example and put it in mobile mode. Let me basically demonstrate what I'm talking about. So you see this icon here. When you see it, basically means that there are some options that are not visible on the page. So clicking on it will basically open up a menu so you can interact with it. This here is for display now. So this menu is on the page. It has always been on the page, but it wasn't just visible by default, right? Until the user takes an action, which is what you can see here right now. So this is a good use case for display none, where you hide an element from showing on the browser because you are trying to make your page or your HTML behave a certain way. So that's how you hide elements with CSS using display none. The default display property for divs is called block, display block. So I usually call divs boxes, and I think even in my previous class when we dealt with divs, I called divs boxes, and it's because divs are basically boxes. So that's what the display block property gives you. The display block property allows your element to take the full width and height of its parent. I'm going to leave the registration form for now, and I'll go to the profile page. On the profile page, we'll play around with display property and other layout techniques I'm going to touch. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a new CSS file. I'll call it profile.h.css, and it's empty now. And I'm going to import that CSS in our profile page. So you remember when I talked about external CSS? So use the link tag, and you basically think CSS slash, you basically pass the path of the file you are trying to import, or the CSS file you are trying to import, so the HTML page knows how to find it. So we've basically imported our empty profile.css in profile.html. Let's go to profile.html. So now we are in profile.html. I'll take this text out and I'll create an empty div. So we already have a div here, which right now it's empty, and the ID of that div is container. This is the div we are going to play around with for now. So I'll go to profile.html. I'll select our div using its ID, and I'll give it let's say a height of 200 pixels and a width of 200 pixels. Let's make it a perfect square, and a background color of red. Remember I talked about colors last week, so this this should not be strange to you. Okay, so we have our div here, our box, 200 by 200 pixels, and it's red. So if I created another div, let me create another div inside this first div, and I say give it an ID of, let's say, post. So I've created a different div. I've given it an ID of post. I'm going to select it here. So we have our div post. Let's give it a background color so it's easy for us to identify. Let's say we want it to be yellow. Red plus, what gives us yellow again? I'm not sure. Red plus green. Okay, so I'll give this a height of 100 pixels and a width of 100 pixels. I just want it to be visible. So divs are empty boxes. Okay, this gives us pink. I was trying to get yellow. Yellow is I can't remember, red plus green, right? Yeah, that gives us yellow. Okay, red plus green is yellow. So I forgot to mention earlier, divs don't have height and width at all by default. They only take, usually they'll take the height or the size of their content if they have content. But if they don't have any content and you don't specify the height or width of a div, it will just not be visible on the page. So what we have done here, initially I created this div, it was just not visible until I gave it height and width since it doesn't have content. I was talking about display block, and like I said, the default display property of an element of a div element is lock. But I also mentioned that it takes, you can see here, this was not added by me. This is the default display property. I mentioned that it usually to take the size, the height and width of its parent, but not all the time. It depends on where and how you use it. There are some, I think when we talk about Flexbox, I'll touch Flexbox a bit and I'll talk about what Flexbox is. I think you actually see this point I'm trying to make, but right now I can't show you, so I'll proceed. So the display property of, I think we talked about display none already. This will basically make the post box disappear, so it will not be visible on the page. And I'll use another display property, which is called flex. So this is me going into Flexbox and touching it for a bit. So the flex property allows us to show items horizontally or vertically, right? So the flex property, if I add another post div to this container, it's going to put it right below the yellow div. And I'm going to do that here so you'll see. It puts it right below the yellow div. And that is basically how HTML sees properties. When you add properties to a page, that's how it views them. It sees them as kind of like a stack. So whatever you put inside or whatever comes after an element, say you have a div here and you have a paragraph tag and you have a h1 tag, HTML will just stack them on. It will just stack them on each other. So the first element will come first and whatever you put below that goes below, right? But the flex property, the display property that has flex value, so display flex, gives us the flexibility to arrange these elements, whether they are text, divs, spans, whatever they are, however we wish to do. So what I want to do on this profile page is basically try to mimic what you have on Instagram. So you know when you open your Instagram page, you have 3 posts and you have the first post, second post, and the third post, then the rest come like below. So you have a row of 3 columns. So you have column 1, column 1, column 1, column 2, column 3, and then you have like multiple rows of your posts. I think it's 3 or 4, however, whether it's 3 or 4, but we'll do 3. So for us to be able to achieve that, we will use something else, which is not flex, but I'll use this example to explain flex and the difference between flex and other display types. So in our profile.html, let me drag this over here. In our profile.html, I'm going to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 posts. And I'll change this from ID to class. You remember I told you an element has to have a unique ID. You cannot give more than one element same ID. So if you give an element an ID, the entire page or the entire HTML file it's only that element that has to have that ID, right? So the reason why I'm changing the ID to class is so that when I style one, since I have applied the class to all the divs, they will all have the same style. So I'll change this, and what I'm going to do is I'll take this out. So this is what I have done. I've removed the fixed height of 200 pixels and fixed width of 200 pixels from the parent container, and the children, which are the posts, you can see this is the parent, and this is the parent div here, and these are the children, right? The 6 posts divs that I added. The children have a width of 100 pixels, height of 100 pixels, and because this has a display block property by default, whatever space that is occupied by the children, the container or the parent will basically adjust to accommodate them. So when I save this, uh, okay, of course. So let me explain what's happening here. Let me explain what's happening here. Don't panic. So the thing is, these children do not have they don't have any content. So I'm going to okay, and that's not the only reason. And they have display none. So that's why they were not visible on the page initially. I was confused too. Okay, we're good. So I was kind of that was a weird situation because I was now going to explain that sometimes when a div does not have a child or a visible content, it's not going to show on the page, like I mentioned before. But what made this weird was the fact that I've already given the post height and width, so they're actually supposed to be visible, right? So that's why I was a bit confused. So let's see what we have here. This looks weird. So we have our parent div, and okay. So see what's happening here is our parent being a div that has a default display value of block has taken the height and width of its own parent, which is the body tag, right? It has taken the height and width of its own parent, which is the body tag. So this is what I was talking about before. Just because I have given it some content, it has assumed the appropriate width and height based on the fact that it has display block value, right? And you can see the children are stacked on each other, like I explained before. So the reason why you see this straight yellow line here is because these are all, as I'm hovering on the tag here in my browser in my browser tool, you'll see it highlight on the page. So you see that these are the different boxes that we added: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sixth one is at the bottom. Yeah. So now we want this to look like Instagram in a way, right? We want to have 1, 2, 3 boxes next to each other, and then the rest will come at the bottom, just following that same pattern. So 3 columns. That's what we are aiming for. That's what we want to do. But we can use display flex to do that, but it's not the best method. It's not the best thing to use. Well, right now I'm going to use display flex. I'll show you how to do that with display flex. Though we will not basically achieve our result, but it will help me explain how you can use the display flex property, where it comes in handy, and what you can use to basically achieve the grid view of Instagram, right? So the display property does not go in the child, which is the post. It goes in the parent, and that the reason is because the parent contains the children, and you want the parent to basically display the children a certain way. You don't style the child, you style the parent. So you are doing, this is basically a layout, right? So you are trying to have the children be in a grid form. You style the parent in order to do that, right? So I'll set display property value flex. This is going to place our posts side by side from the left to the right of the of the container. And you can see here that our posts have moved from vertical to horizontal. So Flex basically gives you the ability to place elements horizontally, and you can decide to place them vertically if you want to. But that's another thing. I'm going to talk about that too. So that's by default, that's basically what the Flex property does. Since HTML stacks elements on themselves, like puts them vertically by default based on how they appear in the document, the display flex property will move those elements and put them horizontally instead of vertically. They'll be displayed horizontally. And you might be wondering how this can be useful. Say you are building a menu like we have on this BBC website here. You can see the menu options are basically adjacent to each other, so they are all horizontal. This here was done with the display flex property, because if they didn't use display flex here on this menu, the home, news, sport, everything will just be vertical, right? But we want it to be exactly like this. So this is how you use display flex to basically achieve this. If we have time, and I think it's good for me to mention that this class will run longer than usual. The reason is because I will not be available next Saturday. I'll be busy doing something else. So I'll try to cover as much as I can in this class. So I think yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. Back to our, so we have all the posts rendered horizontally, right? So there's an element, there's a property called gap. So what the gap property does is, you can see all the divs, all the yellow, the posts are basically joined with each other, right? So you see where one starts and ends, the other begins from, like that exact position. So the gap property helps us create a gap between flexed elements. So the children of the container, which are the posts in this case, the gap property will basically create an equal amount of space between them. So whatever value you set is the amount of space that will be created. But it will have a weird behavior if you you set too much gap, and it starts pushing the children off to so much gap that it basically goes beyond the default width of the parent. So I'm going to set a gap of 5 pixels here. You can see that gap has been created between each of the post boxes. So we have 5 pixels here, and there's still some space here at the end. I'm going to show you how you can rearrange this container and basically have the children, like create like an equal space between each of the children. There is no way you can guess the exact space that has to be between them for them to basically cover the horizontal space of the parent. And so you can see that we added a gap of 5 pixels, and that's the space that has been created between the flexed properties. And if we increase this to say 15, you see it has created more space. We still have a bit of space at the end here. So to achieve the, in order to create an equal space between all the elements, we will not use gap to do that. We will use something else called justify content. So now I'm trying my best not to go as deep as possible so we can cover all the things I intend for us to cover today. So you can justify an element. For those of you that have used Microsoft Word before, I believe you know what justify means. I'm going to explain it still, but justify basically stretches in Microsoft Word. If you have a document typed out, if you use justify, you can use left, you can align the text left, using left align or right align. But if you use justify, it basically stretches every line to the end of the document. That's basically what justify does. Justify in CSS is kind of similar to that, but in a bit more advanced, right? So before I do justify content, I'm going to show you something. So you can see I just type justify here. There are other justify typed properties. So there's justify content, justify items, justify self, justify tracks. I've never used justify tracks in my life, so it's not common. Most of the time you use justify content or justify self. Justify self has a weird behavior because remember when I was talking about applying the flex value to the parent, right? If you wanted to do something with a child, like the post, for example, and you want it to look a certain way or be in a certain position, you can use justify self. But in certain situations, justify self will not work. So I usually advise people to I'll advise you to use justify content, right? So justify content has a bunch of values. Uh, these values have different meanings. They are basically have different behaviors, right? But we are going to use like two or three of them. I'm not going to talk about most of them here because these are things that are not supposed to be rushed. So I'm assuming that you've been going through the resources that I've been sharing these past couple of weeks, and maybe you've come across justify content before, right? So I'm going to just pick three of them. So to achieve our goal here, to have an equal space between all the post elements, we are going to use justify space between. So what this does is it creates an equal space between all the elements, all the children of this container. When I save this, you can see that it has stretched all of them from the beginning to the end, and it has created an equal space between them, right? So sometimes maybe you have a lot of elements and you want just a couple of them to show. There's something else that you can use a couple of them to show in the parent and some others to not basically be visible. There's something else that you can use to do that, which I think I'll touch that later. So justify content, you can use space between to create an equal space between the flexed, elements, which are the posts in this case. You can use justify center. This will put all the elements in the middle of the parent. So you can see there's a space on the left, there's a space on the right. All the children are basically at the center. You can use justify flex end, which will push all the elements to the right side or the end of the flex. So you can see there's space on the left here, and you can use flex start. By default, the value is flex start. So you see we have all the elements horizontally here, but there's space on the right, so it has pushed them to the left. So the starting point of the flex box is left, and the end point is right. If I wanted this flex direction, the direction of the flex, because now the direction of our flex is horizontal, right? If I wanted it to have a different direction, is it's left to right horizontal right now. If I wanted it to be top to bottom vertical, I know what you're thinking about. By default, that's how HTML shows these properties. But there are situations where you might want to do it yourself, depending on what you are styling, right? I don't have a lot of examples in my head right now, else I would have mentioned something. But it's since I talked about it, I'm just going to show you. You can set what is called the flex direction. So the flex direction, um, one second. This is what I want to do something here. I'm going to put numbers in this post so we can basically identify them and understand how CSS structures and where CSS puts them on the page. So the flex direction by default, if you are using display flex, the flex direction is row. It places all the elements in one row. So that's the flex direction by default. But you can change the flex direction to column, which is basically going to bring them from putting them in one row to just one column. So that's basically what um the flex direction column does. So you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it has basically stacked them on each other. So it has put them vertically, right? So that's you can set column reverse. I'm just briefly touching on some of these, which will start from the bottom to the top. So it will bring 6 to the top and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it will reverse the order of the elements. So that's what you can see here. You can also set row reverse, which would start from the last element to the first. So you see it starts from 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. These positions, these directions that you are setting moves the starting point of the flex. So you remember I talked about justify content, flex end, flex start. The reason why you see that there's space on the left here is because since you reversed the flex, since you reversed the direction using row reverse, the starting point of the flex is now at the right side. So it's right to left because you reversed it. By default, it's left to right. So this is the flex start on the right side, and this is the flex end on the left side. So yeah, CSS has a lot of properties that can help you structure your web page however you want. So let's say you were building a website for Arabic people, and the Arabic is read from right to left. So that would be a good example. But there are other examples, better examples. This is a terrible one. That's just what came to my head. So I'm going to take this out. And right now we have our elements 1, 2, 3, 4, our posts basically left to right, horizontally aligned. I'm going to quickly show you something, and then I'll get back to our Instagram example. So I want to give this container a height. Now it doesn't have a height. It's just taking the width. Right now it's taking the width of its parent, which is the body, and it takes the height of its content. So I'm going to give it a height of, let's say, 500 pixels, right? So it has height of 500 pixels. Now, you remember from our last class, I was trying to put the registration form at the middle of the screen, and I didn't want to use Flexbox to do that. I was trying to use Margin Auto. The reason why I didn't want to use the Flexbox is because I had not touched Flexbox. I had not touched. I, I didn't want to confuse anybody. So this is what I want to achieve here now. I want to put this in the middle, at the middle of the parent container. So you might be thinking, yes, we used justify content center before, and it moved the elements to the middle, but it just moves it to the middle horizontally, doesn't move it to the middle vertically. And sometimes you might just want to put something right there at the middle of the screen, right? So I'm going to close this since we are not using it. You just want to put it right there at the middle of the screen or the middle of its parent. In order to do that, there's a different property. This justify content center can help you align the children of a parent, help you align the elements vertically or horizontally. Horizontally by default, but you can basically align them vertically with justify content, but you cannot do both at once. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Remember, our flex is left to right horizontal, right? So that is the reason why it is putting the boxes in the middle horizontally, not vertically. If the direction of the flex was column, where each of the elements are basically aligned vertically, if you used justify content in that case, it will align them vertically but not horizontally. So I said justify content center only puts the children of the container at the center, either horizontally or vertically. Cannot do both of them at once. In order for you to put the children right at the middle, you need to use another property called align items. CSS has hundreds of properties that do different things. The ones we've touched so far, background, padding, blah, 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 we've just scratched the surface. But at least we get by with them. So when you are practicing on your own, it's best to basically explore some of these properties and values to play around with them, so you basically have an understanding of how they work. So the align items takes in a lot of values to flex start, flex end, baseline, and blah blah blah. But what we are interested in here is center. Setting align items to center will align the items vertically no matter what. So you can see we have aligned our posts vertically and horizontally. They are right at the middle of the parent container. So that is how you can put an element right at the middle, right? So let's get back to our original plan of building the Instagram post grid. So I'm going to remove this height. I've explained align center, align item center, and justify content center. So I'm going to remove all this for now. So yeah, we have our box here, and I'll take out display flex. So we have everything just stacked on each other by default as HTML arranges them. So we want to make an Instagram grid of 3 posts per row. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We cannot do that we can do that with flex, but it's unnecessary because CSS has a display grid value that you can basically use to put elements in a grid, right? So I'm going to set display to grid in the container. Nothing has happened. So when I go to the page, you see that basically nothing has happened, and I'll tell you why. So you see that the elements are still exactly how we left them, even after setting display to grid. That's because we've not told the grid how to arrange the elements. Grid is, I wouldn't say it's complex, but it's one of those very interesting features of CSS that you can use to do marvelous things. I'll advise you, as you are going through the resources, you can take your time, actually take your time to understand grid. Understanding the CSS grid is is really important, right? So I'm just going to touch some parts of grid, but I'm not going to detail. So just so we can basically achieve our goal here. What do we want to achieve? We want to put 3 rows, three posts on a row. That just like I don't know if Instagram is 4-3, but just how we have it on Instagram. So we have set display to grid. We want to tell it how many rows. We want to tell CSS how many columns, sorry. We want to tell CSS how many columns, right? How many columns we want to have. We want this, our grid, to have. There's a property called grid template columns. I'll just talk about the rest. So there's grid template columns, grid template rows, grid template areas. You can use CSS grid to manipulate elements in a lot of ways. We are using grid template columns, and I'll tell you what it does. With the grid template columns, you can define the space each element in that container should contain in the grid. That will tell CSS that, okay, CSS will automatically count the number of elements that you have in that container. In this our case, 6, right? And CSS will give the space or width that you have determined. With columns, you are deciding the width of those elements. With grid template rows, you are determining the height of the elements. We are not going to use grid template rows. We are going to use grid template columns because that's what we'll use to achieve our result here. So we'll tell CSS the width it should give each of the posts. And then CSS will calculate the amount of space that is available horizontally and place those elements accordingly, right? So there's something called FR. What does FR even mean? I've forgotten. Let me see. FR meaning in CSS grid. Fraction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's been such a long time since I learned grid. I use it a lot, but I like forgotten what FR means. So FR means fraction. So we have horizontal space. You will tell CSS the fraction of that space it should give to each element. I hope that makes sense because I'm going to show you how to do it, but like I hope it makes sense. I hope the explanation makes sense. So now one FR, one FR, one FR. First of all, just use one FR, just one. One FR means one fraction of the horizontal space. So that's 1/1. So this is what CSS is going to do. This here, this what you are looking at, CSS has given one fraction of the horizontal space to each of the elements, right? But if I set one FR here again, I'm telling CSS that I want two columns, each should have one fraction. So CSS is going to basically put two elements, two posts side by side, because I've told, adding another FR without comma, please. So you don't forget. It's very important. You just use space. Telling CSS this using one FR twice is me telling CSS that use one fraction, but I want two columns. So CSS is going to give us 1 2 1 2 1 2. We'll have the 6 basically. Let me see if it can show you. We'll have the 6 basically arranged side by side, right? So 1 to this, we've told CSS to give us two one FR for one FR twice. So CSS will split the screen in two, and the first element will take one fraction, the other will take one fraction. So the fraction for each element here is 1/2. I hope that makes sense. CSS will divide the page into and give half to one of the elements, because we've told it we just need two columns. If we add one FR here, we have told CSS that we need three columns, right? So CSS will take the full width. In this case, it will calculate, okay, we have the full horizontal space or width of the parent here. I'll divide it by 3. So each of the elements will occupy 1/3, 1/3 of this horizontal space available. So CSS will give us our 1 2 3 side by side as Instagram shows it, but not like this, of course. I'm going to we are going to restructure this entire thing, but I'm just trying to explain the point. So if I add another FR, you've guessed it, 4 columns. So CSS will move the fourth element on to the right, basically giving us 1 2 3 4 columns. Now you might be wondering, oh, why is this container taking the entire space? We just want it to have a particular space. We just want it to contain the children, the posts, right? So we are going to set the width to fit content. I talked about fit content before. Yeah, I talked about fit content before, where you force an element to take the width of its children by default. So you can see here that we have our elements arranged. We need 3 columns, not 4 columns. So let's take out one FR. Okay, so we have each of the columns basically arranged side by side, exactly the way we want it. But it kind of looks weird because there's no space between them. So let's give it some gap. So if we uncomment our gap here of 15 pixels, you'll see 15 pixels is too much. Let's give it, let's say 8 pixels, and let's put it at the right at the middle. So give display, sorry, that's a mistake. Justify content, center, align items, center. I talked about how to basically centralize the element. Oh yeah, this will not work, of course. Sorry, my mistake. Wait, 1 second. We have to give the parent a height of 100%. We remember we used with fit content. That's so the parent cannot put the children in the middle again, because it contains as much space as is available to it for as the children, like it contains as much space as the children contain. So you cannot now put the children at the middle because there is no space to put the children. Let me explain this in a way that you'll understand. So initially, we allowed the div to take the entire width of the page, right? And we were able to put the post right at the middle. But now that we initially changed the width to fit content, whatever the total width of the children is, that is what the parent will take. That is the width that the parent will take, right? So the parent will not spread to the end. So we've actually put ourselves in a we have a problem here. I knew this was going to happen. So because the width of our parent is so wide and the width of our children is just 200 pixels, and we divided our horizontal space by 3, it's giving an entire, let me show you what I'm talking about. It's giving an entire space or horizontal space to each of the children. You can see it's giving the children, it has divided the horizontal space by 3. It's giving the children too much space. So in order for us to basically achieve that exact Instagram look, we'll have to put the parents in another div. I'm going to explain why. We are going to put the parents in another div, or we are just going to put the children in another div, so we can basically give that div a fixed width. In order for grid to work exactly the way you want, in this our case, we want 3 rows. Either the children fill the space provided by the grid, which is this entire block that you are looking at, or if you want the children to have their own width and height, then you have to reduce the space that the parent has so that the children will look better. I could allow the boxes to be fit. I could allow the post to fill this entire box that is provided by the grid, but it will look too large. It will look too big. That's not what we are trying to achieve here. So this is what I am going to do. The reason why I took that time to explain everything is so that when I do it, you'll actually get my point. So we have our main container here that has a background color of red. We'll create a different div and call it, let's give it an ID of posts container, and then right inside that we'll put our posts. So then we'll come here and create and select that post container using its ID, and the entire display grid, everything that we have written for the main container, we'll move it out like this and put it here. Why? That's because this post container is the immediate parent of our post now. It's no longer the container. The container is the main parent. The post container is what contains the posts, right? So that's why we moved our display grid and the grid template columns, all those style and everything into the post container. What we are going to take out is this. Why? I'm going to tell you. So let me save this and show you how it looks first. So we have, yeah, that's exactly how it's supposed to look. So 1 second. Bow, display grid. Okay. Okay. So now the main parent has taken the width and height of the body, which is the red background that you've seen. We want to put this post container at the middle of that red background, because this post container is what will contain each of the posts, right? So that's why I moved the align item center and justify content center. Have to give this display. Justify content and align items will not work unless the element has a display property of grid or flex, and some other ones too, but grid and flex majorly. So I'll set this to flex. Yeah, so we've put it right at the middle, but our post container is not basically aligning the, oh, wait a minute, there's a mistake here. The post container does not have display grid, so it means our style has not been applied. Let's see why. ID is posts container. Oh, okay, we forgot an S. I was surprised. Okay. That got me for a second. So yeah. So we've basically achieved the Instagram look. That's basically what I was going to say. But let's make it look better by giving this a height of 100%. So this will take the height of the body. Yeah. Okay. So we have the six posts basically arranged in a grid of 3 columns, exactly the way we wanted. We were able to achieve this because we moved the posts and put them in a different container. It's not like we needed to do that per se, but I just wanted to explain my point. We could have just used the container div, but then that means we'd have to like style the body because the body will be the main parent. Now we wanted to give we like our post container takes the width of its children, right? And we wanted to put that right in the middle of the page, which is what we have done here right now. And the only way we would have been able to do that is if the parent of this post container had justify content center and align item center. So that's why we had to give this container those properties here. You can see justify content center, align items center. So that is what puts the post container right at the middle. So just so that the post container is visible, since we are basically dealing with boxes here, I'm going to give it a background color of blue. Blue is RGB, so 0000FF. So this will give us blue. So you can see the space that the post container contains is basically the space that its children contains, right? We did not give it a height or a width. It just basically takes the width and height of its children. If we were to change the display value of this post container to block, which is the default, like I explained, it will just take the width of its parent. So that just wanted to make that point. So we've been able to achieve our Instagram look. And now, mind you, no matter how many elements you add, CSS Grid will automatically arrange them the way you have defined in the code. So you can see that I have added 3 more elements, 7, 8, and 9. So we have 9 posts now. Based on we told CSS that we want 3 columns, right? CSS is going to arrange them like that, no matter the number of elements you have. So you've seen that it has added 7, 8, and 9 to the bottom of the grid, right? So that's basically how you use CSS grid. You can use it to do a lot of things, but for now, uh, this is the simplest way. This is one of the easiest things you can do with grid. There are some other complex grid patterns. Let me show you something. I think Pinterest has a very nice grid implementation. Let me show you. Is it Pinterest? Yes, exactly. So you can see how these images are arranged. Yeah, your style is beautiful. Thank you. You can see that they are basically each of the columns are not aligned, like the columns are not aligned with each other, right? You see that some of the images are basically at the bottom, some are at the top. You can use grid to achieve this, but in a very different way. You can use grid and flex to achieve this. What they are doing here is you can only use flex, you can also use grid. What they are doing here is they are either doing each of these columns that you are seeing is a single grid, and then all of them are arranged with like side by side. It's a flex box, like they are using flex to do that. Or that's one way to do it. Or they are basically setting well, yeah, that the first way would be the easiest. The second way would be setting the grid template row to have each of the rows here to have more height. But that way would be too complex actually. So the way I explain this has to be the easiest way. It's actually a very nice website. Let's get back to what we're doing. Okay, so let me explain something else. If I wanted the second element to take more horizontal space than the first element, I can do this. So if I wanted the second element to take twice as much horizontal space as the other elements, this is I've set its value, its width fraction to 2. So it will take as if the value of this is 1/3, like I explained before, right? This will take twice of that. Does that make sense? It will take twice of that, which will be 2/3. So 2, which is the fraction you specified, over 1, 2, 3, the number of columns. The math is not complex, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. So you see this extra space here. This extra space is left for the what do you call it? It's left for the second element to fill. The reason why they are not filling it is because we give them a fixed width of 200 pixels. So it's basically maintaining of 100 pixels, sorry, it's maintaining its width. But if we did not do that initially, maybe we allowed it to fill its space by itself without giving it a fixed width of 200 pixels. Let's say um let's say we give it let's say we give let's remove the width. Let me check something. Yeah, of course it's going to look weird. Okay, let's give it how do we fill that space with the second element specifically? Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so if we said the mean width was 100 pixels, 100. Okay, if we set the mean width to 100 pixels. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the minimum width is 100 pixels, but the maximum width is not defined, so it can take as much space that is as available to it. In this case, our second element has twice as much space because we give it 2fr, right, as the space that it should contain in the grid. That is the space that it's taking. But it's this our grid now looks like it's a grid of 4 columns. Technically it is. Why? Column 1 has a width of 100 pixels. Column 3 has a width of 100 pixels. Column 2 has twice that width. So it has a width of 200 pixels. You can see this has 100 by 100 looking at the page there. I don't know if okay, I think it should be showing 100 by 100. If you look at the top left there, the thing that the tooltip that shows up, 100 by 100. The second has 200 by 100. 200 the width, 100 the height. I've talked about grid too much, so let me get to other things, and we're running out of time. Okay, so that's basically how CSS grid works. I hope that made sense. The chat is open. If in case you have a question or there's something I've said that you don't understand, please go ahead to ask away. So I'm going to talk about position. What would be a good example for that? So I've talked about the display property. I'm going to talk about the position property. Give me a second. Let me quickly. Okay, display. I have like an outline, so that's what I'm looking at, so I don't forget something. Talked about display, talked about grid, talked about flex, and what's position. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we are going to talk about position now. And okay, yeah. When we finish positioning, that will be all for our layout of CSS Fundamentals II. And then I'll think about what we are going to do next. Okay, so yeah, so we've talked about the display property. Let me get to positioning. So CSS allows you to put elements at if you want to put an element at a particular position on the page, CSS has a feature that allows you to do that. Why would you want to do that in the first place? I will tell you why. There are several examples. Positioning in CSS has a lot of uses. You find yourself, when you start building websites for real, you find yourself wanting to use positions a lot. And there are different types of positioning in CSS. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. If you understood grid, yeah, there's a high chance that you'll understand positioning. So and I'm not trying to make it sound complex. I'm just trying to make a point. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'll create another element here right below the post container, and I'll call it what do we, okay, I'm trying to think here. Let's create a header just like we saw on BBC, on the BBC website. So let's create a div, and the idea of this div will be based on the fact that CSS has HTML has a special element that you are supposed to use when you are creating navigation features that basically help users to navigate or move around your website. And this tag is called the nav tag. The nav tag. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, so I need to drink some water so I so I can keep talking. Okay. So thank you. I don't know why I'm thanking you, but thank you. So the nav tag basically is supposed to be used for creating navigation features. In this case, we want to create a horizontal menu where you see the home page, about page, blah, 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 right? That's what we want to do here. So we are using the navigation tag, and we are going to call this page nav. That's the ID that we've given to this, our navigation. That's the ID that we've given to this, our navigation, what do you call it? Navigation tag, right? So this navigation tag is going to have a couple of items, the menu items. And let's say we had 4 pages. I'm going to use the span tag. I talked about the span in my first class, so this should not be strange to you. Home, about, further front pages, FAQ, contact us. I can't think of any other common menu that most of these websites have. So now we have 4 items in our nav: home, about. These are basically supposed to lead to pages that right now those pages don't exist, but that's what we are aiming to achieve here. So I'll copy this ID and I'm going to target it, or basically select it in our CSS. Right now, if I save this, you'll see, yes, okay, that's true. It's going to look weird. The nav is just on the side of our grid. Something I want to do here. So let's give this grid, so to put it on top. Okay. So in case you are wondering why I changed it from flex to grid, it's because display flex puts elements side by side horizontally, as I explained before. I could have just changed the direction of the flex to column, but using grid also puts elements by default on top of each other until you specify how many columns the grid should have. So to achieve this same result, remember it was flex before, right? And the menu was just by side, like just next to the grid, our posts. And I changed this to grid, then you put it on top. If I still want to do that without using grid, I can use flex direction, like I talked about before, change it to column, and this puts it right on top of our posts, right? So you can see that this is struggling to come to the middle because we set justify content center, align items center, you remember. So everything that goes into our container div will be sent to the middle of the container. That's basically what justify content center and align item center has done for us. But we don't want this to be in the middle. We want it to be up top, at the top of the page, right? I'll show you how to do that, but I'll just quickly style this menu items so it looks more like a menu. How we let's quickly, I think I'll take out this background color so it doesn't look weird. Okay. Yeah. So let's style our navigation. So we'll set display. It's already flexed, but I'll still set display flex. and I'll give the content a gap of 15 pixels. So each of the menu items will have a space of 15 pixels between them. That's basically what our gap gives us. I did not talk about row gap, column gap. I'm not going to talk about that. You can read those up when you are reading Flexbox. But those are properties: column gap, row gap. If you want the gap to be horizontally long, you use column gap. If you want the gap to be vertically long, you use row gap, right? So yeah, so let us style the span. Let us style the span, which in this case, let me quickly get there. The span tag, which are the menu, the navigation items. That's what we want to style now. But we don't want to give it a class. We want to target them based on their parent. I don't know if I mentioned this before when I started CSS, but I think I'm going to use it here so you see how it works. If I am since I want to target the child of a tag or the child of an element, I'll select the element I want, the main element, which is the parent, our page nav here, and the child that I want to style. So I've used two types of selectors here, the ID selector and the tag selector, right? So this basically is telling CSS that whatever I put inside these brackets, I want you to look for every span tag inside an element that has ID page nav. So every span tag in page nav, apply this style to it. And if we go back to the HTML, you see here that we have our navigation, page nav, that's the ID. Every span tag will take the style that will apply to it, right? The styles that we are going to write here. So we'll set the font size of each of the span to, let's set the font size to, let's say, 14 pixels. Font family, it looks kind of weird using Times New Roman. So let's give it something like Helvetica, and maybe an alt of Arial. So it looks better, right? Let's give it a padding. Let's give it a padding of 5 pixels. Let's give it a padding of, let's say, 5 by 10. And yeah, let's give it when you hover on it, we want something to change, something to happen to it, like maybe your cursor to change to the pointer, so the user knows that they can click on that element. So there's a cursor property where you can change how the cursor looks on the page, especially when the cursor is over a particular element on the page. So if you take your cursor to that menu item, you want the cursor to point at the item that you are hovering on. So we have all the cursor types in your operating system are basically visible on CSS. So you have pointer, you have progress, you have resize. There are a lot of them. You have zoom in, zoom out, depending on whatever feature you are working on. We have grab, if you allow on your page, if you allow elements to be grabbed and dropped somewhere. That's a complex thing to remember. Yeah, we have not allowed. If I set this to not allowed, for example, if you hover on the element, you see that it's basically showing you that you are not supposed to click on that, right? So that's basically how you can manipulate the cursor on your page. But in this case, we want the value to be pointer. So set the value to pointer. If you hover on the element, on the nav element, it's going to point at that element, letting the user know that they can click on it, right? We also want it to look a bit different when you hover on it. So I didn't talk about pseudo classes last time. Have I? I didn't. I don't think I did. I may have missed it. So they are basically each element on your page has a state, right? Every element on your page has a state. By default, they are in their rest or default state. An element can be in a state, a hover state. So when you hover on that element, you have changed the state to hover. So that element, you are hovering on that element. So it has, you've given that will be the current state of the element. An element can have a focused state. So for example, you are trying to log into a website. When you click on the input where you type in your email, the moment you click on it, you are focused on that element at that point in time. So right now, we want to style the hover state of our span. We want to style the hover state of each of these navigation items. How do we do that? We are going to select it first. So page nav, we want all the spans inside the page nav, and we want to style a particular state, in this case hover. In order for you to style that state, you have to use the colon. So the colon character allows you to access some specific properties of an element. If you want to style a specific property or state of an element, the colon allows you to do that. The colon in CSS also allows you to do a lot of things, especially when you are selecting. Maybe you want to select the first child of an array of elements, or the first child of a parent, the last child, a particular child. I didn't go into all those because those are things that I expected that you probably should have gone through when you, if you went through the resources I shared, of course. So how we do that is using the colon hover. So what we are doing here is we have selected our span, all the spans in the page nav, and we are trying to style the hover state of that span. So when you hover on the span, whatever we type in here is what will be applied to that particular element. So what we want to do here is, let me quickly just give it a nice style. Let's say border radius. I talked about border radius in my last class. 4 pixels, background color, background color. Let me look for a nice color. Let me look for a nice color, something like orange. Yeah, okay. Color. So we want to change the color to white when the element is hovered on. Okay, so what we have done here is when you hover on an element, you can see that we gave it a background color of orange. It's an orange color, but we used the hex to the hex value of the color. Background color orange when you hover on it. So it's the hover state style that is being applied now, right? We change the color of the text to white. The reason why I gave it a border radius is so it looks nice, right? So that's basically what we have achieved with our hover state, right? So now it looks better, but we want to put it right at the top of the page of the top of the container div. That's where position comes in, right? So we'll come back to our original nav, the navigation that we created, because this is what we want to move to the top. If we move the parent to the top, the children will follow because they are in the parent, right? So that's what we are going to style. So I'll use the position property here. The position property has a couple of values. It has the absolute value, the fixed value, relative, static, sticky. All of them have different behaviors. I'm going to talk about them, but I'll use one or two, right? So the relative, by default, okay, I think I'll start with sticky. By default, with static. By default, the position of an element is static. By default, if you have not styled that element or given it any position, its position is static. It's an element that is static remains where you have put it. Whether you scroll past it, whatever you do, that element will remain there. When you scroll it, to follow the page and scroll, right? A sticky element will stick to a particular position that you have given it. So let's say we wanted that our menu to just remain at the top when you scroll. we can use sticky to do that. Most of the time, it's advisable to use sticky. Sticky remains within the constraints of its parent. So if you give if you give an element position sticky, it remains in the constraint of its parent. Now, if you want it to stick to the top, you can make it stick to the top. If you want it to stick to the bottom, you can make it stick to the bottom. But it is that element will stick only when it gets to the position that you want it to stick to. And I'm going to demo that. I'm going to show you how to do that here, so you basically understand the point I'm trying to make. Then there is relative. So an element that has a relative position, basically, how would I explain this so it makes sense? If an element has relative position, its position is relative to both its parent and its children. So this is not clear enough, but I'll show you how to use it so you understand. But if you give a position to any of its child elements, that position that you give to it will be relative to the parent. I'm going to explain that by showing you. I'll explain it again by showing you. An element that has the absolute value, if you give an element the position of absolute, you can basically put the element at any point of the page, right? But then the element will not be considered as part of the page. It will be considered as an element that has been removed from the stack of elements that HTML has to deal with, and then it puts it on top of. So it basically removes that element and puts it on top of every other element. I'm going to show you. Same with fixed. It's just that the fixed property basically ignores any parent. So if you give an element the property fixed, it will ignore its parent. Wherever you put it, that is where it's going to be, and it will remain there. Whatever moves on the page, that element will not move, it will remain there. So I've just basically explained the values of position. I'm going to show you how to use them. Okay, so like I said, by default, an element has position static, right? We want our header, the navigation bar, to be at the top. So I'm going to give it a position sticky, and I'll set top to 0. So okay, when you are dealing with position, in order for you to put an element at a particular place on the page, you can use these 4 properties: top, bottom, left, and right. You can only use them if an element has a position property. If an element does not have a position property, top, bottom, left, and right will never work. And it also depends on the position property that the position value that the element has. In this case, our element has a position value sticky. When it gets to the top of the page, it's going to stick there. That's basically what we want it to do. So I'll give it top 0 pixels. I want it to stick at 0 pixels on the page, right? Our page has not changed much actually. And the reason is because our page first off does not scroll. We are going to make this page scrollable so that we can scroll. When we scroll and it gets to the top, we'll see that our navigation will stick to the top. This sticky is not the best. You can use it. I mean, it depends on how you structure your page. What's important is how you structure your page. You can use it for navigation menus, or you can use something else. Let me show you. So what we are going to do here is we'll go back to our profile.html, and we will add a lot of posts. Let's just replicate this. So now we have 18 posts. Nice. Okay, so let's replicate it again, so we have a lot more. So now we have a lot of posts, and you can see that because of the number of posts that we have, our navigation menu has been pushed to the top, and it remains at the top as we scroll, right? I think we have the posts are too many. Let me remove some of them. 1 second. Let me see how this looks. Remove a bit again. How many posts did I paste? Give me a second. Let me remove. There are too many. Okay. 1 second. Remove. Okay. Okay, I think let me remove a couple more. This will not scroll. Okay. So now, because we give our navigation menu here, because we give it a top position, it's going to remain at the top. When you scroll to that position, it's going to remain at the top, and that's where it will remain. But now it looks kind of weird because the elements under it are showing, because we did not give it a background color or whatever. But you get the point. You can see that it just remains at the top. Let me give it a background color so it looks. It's a very terrible example. I think if we had more time, is the reason why we've not actually built a full-blown site is because there's no time. There's no time for me to teach. If I finish teaching, we are out of time. There will be no time to build, right? So that's why I've spent the last 30 minutes plus building. So, and explaining, teaching and building at the same time. So you can see that our menu remains at the top. If I remove a couple more of this, so our page doesn't scroll any longer. Let me take it back to how it was. Let's say, give me a second. Let's say I removed all this and we just had exactly. You can see that our elements basically follows the grid because we gave the content of the page the container. We made them, we basically gave them, moved them to the center of the container. We moved all the children to the center of the container. So despite the fact that this has position sticky, it still moves to the center, right? That's because position sticky only takes effect when the element has gotten to the point, to the position that you want it to stick to. Right now, the element is not at the top of the page, so it will not stick, right? But if it was at the top, then it would have stuck to the top of the page. We can use another position type called absolute. I explained absolute before. Absolute removes the element from the elements that you know, the elements that the page is aware of. It removes the element from that list of elements that are on the page and places the element on top of all those other elements, right? So because of that, our header, our navigation will move to the top of the page by default. That's because the page doesn't see it. It's not, the HTML doesn't see it as part of the elements that it has to deal with. It basically has like a higher dimension. Yes, dimension is the right word. It has a higher dimension than the rest of the elements on the page. So because of that, since you gave it position top, it has moved it to the top. It would basically not respect any other part of the page again, right? That's exactly how fixed works. That's how fixed works too. But fixed can remove the element from its parent. Fixed removes the element from the parent. Position fixed only obeys the HTML page. It doesn't obey any div that element belongs to. It doesn't obey even it doesn't obey any navigation that the elements belong to, whatever. It just obeys the main container of the page, which is the body, right? So now fixed and absolute look the same because of the terrible example that I'm using to teach this. I'm going to do something else so I can explain my point better. What I'm going to do is I will give, let me bring back the background, and I'll give this a height of 300 pixels. Let me see how it looks. Good. So now we've given our container a height of 300 pixels, right? Good. We are going to move this to the bottom. Right now it has a fixed position. Let me change this back to absolute. I want to show you the difference between absolute and fixed. If we changed top to bottom, so we've set bottom 0 pixels, it will not move to the bottom of the page. It will move to the bottom of its parent. Okay, now it will move to the bottom of the page because its parent doesn't have position relative. Sorry, that was a mistake. So its parent, Let me give it a position relative. Okay, so remember I talked about relative position. Giving the parent a relative position will make all the elements in that parent obey the size, the height and width of the parent. So whatever position you put elements on the page, they will never bleed out or leave the parent container. So that's what the relative position, the power that the relative position gives the parent container, right? So now that I have given the parent container position relative, whatever position I give to its children, in this case, absolute for our page navigation, it will never leave the parent container. You can see that it has put the page navigation at the bottom of the parent, not the bottom of the page. That's because the parent has a position of relative. So absolute obeys the relative position of a parent, but fixed does not. If you give this element a fixed position, the only part of the page it will be, the only tag in the HTML that is going to obey is the body tag. So wherever position you put it, if you give it a fixed position, whatever, if you give it top 0, bottom 0, wherever, it's going to be exactly where you want it to be on the page, not on the parent. But absolute obeys the relative position of the parent. That's the reason why when I said, as I have set this to bottom, it's at the bottom of the parent. So if I changed the position to fixed, to move it to the bottom of the page, because it doesn't care about the parent container any longer. The parent it has more power in this case than the parent container. So it has left the dimension of the parent container. Position absolute removed the element from the dimension of its siblings, which are these posts here. But fixed removed and put it in the dimension of its parent. But fixed has removed the element totally from any other tag on the page. And right now, wherever you place it on the page, that's where it's going to be. So if I wanted it to be at the bottom left, I have given it bottom 0. I'll give it left 0. You can see that it has moved it to the bottom left of the page. If I wanted it to be at the top right, I'll change bottom to top and I'll change left to right, 0 pixels, 0 pixels. You can see that it has moved it to the top right of the page. So that's the flexibility that position fixed gives you. You can move an element to any point of the page at all. And you need to actually understand how to use it. And there are use cases. If the width and height of this element was 100% by 100%, 100% by 100%, or if we wrote it in such a way that it takes the width and height of the entire body, no element on the page will be accessible because this will basically be covering them since it's on top of them, right? It has a higher dimension. The best example to demonstrate this would be with a modal, but there's no time to do that. There's no time to do that. Trust me, I wish I had more time. To if I was actually making like tutorial videos, I would be more relaxed and I would build websites from beginning to end. But since we are crunching here and I've even gone over, the class has been running for what, 1 hour 30 minutes. So I've gone over the typical 1 hour, that's the normal 1 hour that I promise you. I promise most of the time. So that's the reason why I teach and I write, but not really build per se. I think hopefully in time we'll be able to, just thinking about this. Either way, let's get to what we are doing. Okay, so yeah, so that's basically how the position fixed works. And you can see that it doesn't care about the container with the red background. That's the reason why you see the contact us bleeds out of that container. It's basically outside the container, it's not in the container. If I changed this to absolute, it will still maintain top right though, because with top right, but it's going to be within the container, right? And this position, this top left right values don't actually have to be 0. That's just how much space from the position, in this case the top, to the element. If we wanted it to have more space, so we wanted it to be 10 pixels, we wanted it to be 10 pixels from the top of its parent. That is what we are going to do. You see that it has moved it 10 pixels from the top of its parent, right? If you wanted it to be 10 pixels from the right of its parent, that's basically what it has done here for us. So that's basically how position works. I think there are better examples I would have used, but no time. So since we've already built out the grid system, I just decided to quickly build a menu and, to explain my point. Let me take this back to how it was. So we've covered layouts basically. I hope all the things I've talked about have been clear, and uh, I know I mixed up a couple of things along the way because of the fact that I'm rushing. Like I said before, we'll not be able to meet next weekend because I'll be busy doing something else. So that class is not going to hold. But for the basics of web development that I wanted, remember when I started this, it's basically what I've been going through is basically the basics of web development, right? And um, I feel like I've covered enough, right? I feel like I've covered enough to help you kickstart your journey in web development. I've given you an idea of what this entails. I've not talked about JavaScript. I did not intend to talk about it, honestly. That's because JavaScript is a full-blown programming language, and you'd have to learn programming. Though not fully, but I mean, for you, if you want to understand JavaScript in depth, you have to learn programming concepts like loops, selection, and the rest of other things. Which I did not intend to teach. My intention was just to introduce you to HTML and CSS, which I have done. And unfortunately, we've not been able to complete a couple of things like our login page, our registration page. I wished that we were able, we were able to have registration. I have no idea why. Let me see. I I wish we were able to, you know, design this, build the form, submit, blah blah blah. But we'll not be able to do that, unfortunately. I hope this series has been helpful, at least for people that have taken it serious right from when we started. I hope it has been helpful. I hope it has basically helped you, because that's my goal here, to help, right? I hope it has helped you. And like I said, if this is serious for you, if this is serious, it means that the resources that I've been sharing, you've been going through them at least once in a while. You've been practicing on your own. You've not been waiting for this class to continue from where you stopped, because there is no way you would be able to master any of this, even the simplest of things that I've talked about, if you don't actually practice at least every day. Starting off like this and skipping days, or maybe it doesn't have to be every day. I believe most people work, so maybe every 2 days. But if you are not consistent, you are going to forget everything. That's the truth. What we have done this past couple of weeks, we've just been scratching the surface. I've just been introducing you to things in HTML, CSS, to help you start web development if you intend to go into web development. um so I've shared free code camp before. I think it's even right there in the description of this live. This course on free code camp called responsive web design will help you build websites from beginning to end. So you will learn everything you need to learn in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I think it covers JavaScript. It's basics of HTML and CSS. Okay. I don't know if it covers JavaScript. I'll check. JavaScript, I'll check. But the best thing about it is it's free. You don't have to pay anything at all to learn this, to use this course. You don't have, it's free of charge. I would have suggested platforms like Codecademy and some other platforms, but they are kind of premium websites, right? There's another website, I've forgotten the name. I'll check. It's really detailed. I've forgotten, I'll check. But this Codecademy course has a lot of examples. You can see here there's a project. So as you are learning, you'll be building projects alongside. Learn HTML by building a cat photo app. Learn basics of CSS by building a cafe menu. Learn CSS colors by building a set of colored markers. So free code camp teaches you with projects and examples. And this is not the only way to learn, of course. There are other ways. For me, I think I prefer using videos and documentation, right? But I think some people, since you are starting off, documentation might be kind of hard for you. Let me see. One second. So MDN Web Docs, basically, I've been sharing this too, has references for um, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, web APIs, a lot of other things. I think this is part of the resources that I shared in the description. So you can see here in HTML, it talks about tags, everything. There are basically tutorials here. So I'll advise you to go through all these resources, especially this free code camp course. And there are other things here. I think you also get certification. I don't know if you have to pay for the certificate, but most importantly is to get the knowledge. So you can also learn JavaScript here and some other things. I will not advise you to pick up any of this yet until you are familiar with at least one programming language. But responsive web design certification, JavaScript algorithms and data structures certification, these two very important. If you have mastered this, if you have finished this course, you can pick up front-end development libraries, which in this case, I'm guessing will teach React, right? So I think for those of you that have followed me from the beginning of this class till today, I am advising that this should be your next step. I'm going to resume this class, but it's not going to be about web development. It's going to be about something else. It will be about problem solving. Honestly, that's actually what I wanted to start with, but I discovered that my first video, a lot of people responded, and most of them wanted to basically learn web development, the basics of web development. And I thought, oh, maybe it would be a good idea to teach that first, to just basically help people start, right? And then I'll get to problem solving. So what I'm going to be doing is every Saturday, I think I have to figure out my schedule again. Apart from next Saturday, of course, which I'll be busy. I'm going to pick a problem and solve. So the class it will not be a class per se, honestly. It will just basically be a session, a problem solving session. So experienced engineers can join, newbies can join. If you want to get into programming, you can join. It basically helps you understand the concepts of problem solving. We are going to pick questions from Lit Code, from HackerRank, of different difficulties, simple questions, hard questions, medium questions. We'll pick questions from here and we'll basically break them down and solve them. So that's going to be the next thing I'll be going into. So thank you for following me from the beginning of this class till today. At least I've taken you guys kind of far enough. And yeah, thank you. I hope you found this entire series helpful. Yeah, we've come to the end of the class. I'll see you next month. I'll not be available next week. I'll see you guys next month. Have a blast. Bye.